I recognize that my new preaching voice may not fit everyone's need. So if you do have a hearing issue and you would like a copy of the sermon to read along with, please raise your hand and Nancy will find you. All right, well, we'll give this a try and you can always pick it up later. My next door neighbor is Jewish and she loves Easter lilies. I often joke with her about this because I tell her when I go over to her house that no place smells like church on Easter morning as much as her living room. This week I got to hang out with her and another friend. The early spring air wafted through the windows as the birds sang outside, and the scent of those lilies hung heavy in that air. And my friends were sharing details of their Passover Seder. And one of them asked me about my plans for preaching on Easter. And I told her that my topic was going to be joy. And at first I thought she was going to tell me something that brings her joy, perhaps about the Seder, perhaps about this extremely important holiday that we just passed in the Jewish calendar. But what was surprising to me is that the conversation quickly took a U-turn into politics. And my friend expressed her worries about the political news. And she told me that she is worried that things are leaning more and more in a grave direction. She confided that she sees an almost inevitable trajectory where democracy is coming apart. This is why she said she does not feel a lot of joy when she thinks about our world right now. If the world is heading in an inevitably bad direction, what room is there to experience joy? Hasn't the world become too grave to talk about joy? In Dostoevsky's The Brothers Karamazov, two of the three brothers engage in lengthy theological conversations. Alyosha aspires to a religious vocation, and he defends religion against the charges of his brother Ivan. Ivan, in contrast, is a strident atheist who objects to Christian theology. And Ivan's presence in the book is cyclical. The theological conversations emerge again and again, and each time Ivan's theological rebuttal is more fierce and powerful. In one account, he talks about a person who injured an aristocrat's dog. It was an accident, but that did not matter. Instead, the aristocrat had the person torn limb from limb by his other dogs. And Ivan asks his brother, how can one justify a world in which such atrocities happen? How can one say that a world that contains such suffering can ever be theologically justified? No matter what happens to anyone else in that world, would not such a world with such an atrocity be an evil world? It is little stretch to wonder, as some theologians have, is not Dostoevsky's objection reason enough to dismiss joy? Can joy be justified in a world where people suffer? And if we do feel joy, wouldn't it be better to just keep it to ourselves? With all that is wrong and heartbreaking in our world, experiencing joy can be a little bit like smiling at a funeral. It can feel inappropriate to all the situations that are grave ones. These reflections were driven home for me when I learned about the threat to the Highland Park High School this week. This week, a gun was discovered on the school property, and it caused the school to go into lockdown, and then other places in Highland Park went into lockdown. One of my best friends is the Presbyterian minister in Highland Park, and his children go to that school. I was worried for them. And I was also worried for our own members who are Highland Park residents. My friend at the Presbyterian Church told me that he was going to revise his sermon for Easter morning. And I will admit that I wondered the same thing in the face of such grave matters. Should I not change my sermon topic from joy to something else? But I decided not to. And the reason is contained within the gospel story itself. The first thing to mention is that the story of Easter is about a grave matter. Literally so. In the early morning, Mary Magdalene approaches the grave of Jesus, and she expects to find his corpse within that tomb. And what she finds instead greatly surprises her. The grave is empty. For a moment, she thinks that the grave has been robbed. She turns to see a man that she mistakes to be the gardener, and she begs him to return the body of Jesus. It is only then that she realizes that the man that she mistook to be the gardener is actually Jesus. And upon seeing this, she shouts in joy and recognition, Rabboni, which means teacher. And then she does not keep the secret to herself. Instead, she goes and shares the news with the other disciples. And what the gospel account says, what the word that it ends with, is that they, meaning the disciples, were overjoyed. Overjoyed. I take this to mean that the joy consumed them, that it became uncontainable. And so this then is the second thing to say about the Easter story. While it is about a grave matter, it is also about joy. The two are yoked together in this story. The deepest joy happens outside the grave. In Christian theology, a lot of the Easter message is about triumph. The resurrection is about Christ's triumph over death. But I want to push back on this theology. And it is because of the way that joy shows up outside the grave in the Easter story. It is not a victory that triumphs once and for all over human suffering, rendering all other human suffering irrelevant. Instead, it is a very human joy that emerges from vulnerability. It is the vulnerability of cherishing life amidst suffering and amidst the potential for suffering. It is not the joy of winning a battle. It is the joy of finding a balm, a relief, a healing for one's grief. When I spoke with other members who live in Highland Park, many of them expressed relief. And no doubt there was an appreciation for the heaviness of the matter, but that heaviness paradoxically did not dispel the sense of lightness that people could embrace their loved ones, that no tragedy had occurred. Now, some may say it is callous to feel relief and joy when we escape danger, especially in a world where others don't. But I don't agree with that. Because those moments when we experience relief and joy can open us to our own vulnerability. And that same vulnerability that opens us to relief and joy also opens us up to caring for others. As I heard one parent say, the event at the school this week only strengthened his resolve to ban assault rifles. We can experience joy and relief, empathy and care and compassion all at the same time. Our hearts are big enough for that. In this view, Joy results from our vulnerability. The root of the word vulnerability is to be open to being wounded. To be open to being wounded. Vulnerability is to be radically open to life. And because of this, as the theologian Jürgen Moltmann puts it, vulnerability takes apart the seeming alternatives between suffering and joy, like we have to choose between one or the other. When we are vulnerable, we lay ourselves open to all of the experiences of life. The openness to life is an openness both to suffering and joy. When we are open to life, we can be happy and sad. When we are open to life, we can laugh and weep. When we are open to life, we can rejoice and protest at the same time. The more deeply we allow ourselves to be drawn into life, the more alive and simultaneously the more capable of sorrow we become. The deepest joy happens beside the grave because we cannot be open to joy unless we are also open to sorrow. When we are vulnerable, we open ourselves to the pain of others more and not less. And in that opening to others, that vulnerability that to what others are going through, we experience a connection that brings both deeper empathy and deeper joy. Joy in life's happiness motivates us to revolt against what would destroy life. And grief over life that is destroyed is nothing other than an ardent longing for life's liberation into joy. If we need a justification for joy in a world that feels too heavy for joy, then I'm going to say that this is it. Joy is a part of our opening up to the world. And in that opening, it invites us to heal and repair the suffering and the pain that we find around us. The deepest joy happens beside the grave. It results from the vulnerability of being open. It is being open to all that wounds us and feeling deeply that suffering. And it is being open to all that can be saved, loved, cherished, relished, resurrected. It is opening ourselves up and giving ourselves over. It is feeling deeply and fully drinking in a life that contains both bitterness and sweetness. The deeper that sorrow carves into your being, the more joy your being will contain. The cup that holds your wine is the very cup that was burned in the potter's oven. The lute that soothes your spirit comes from the very wood that was hollowed out by knives. If I had had another moment, this is how I would have responded to my friend in her living room with those Easter lilies. That the stuff of life that splits our hearts open can be the source of pain and fear, but sometimes it is also the source of a joy that overcomes us. And when that joy arrives, my friends, say yes to it. Say yes to it and then run. Share the news with others. Share it with those who, upon hearing the good news that occurs beside the grave, will also be overjoyed.